All right, well, welcome everyone. It's so good to see you in person and on Zoom, not dissing our Zoom participants, very important. My name is Angela Kashuba and I am the Dean of the UNC Eshelman School of Pharmacy. I am excited about hosting this second annual Harold and Carol Kohn Distinguished Alumni Lecture Series as part of Pharmacy Alumni Weekend. This is really terrific. Last year we did all this virtually, and this year we're now virtual and in person, and so I couldn't be more thrilled at this. Now, before I introduce our distinguished lecturer, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge Hal and Carol Kohn for their generosity in establishing this esteemed lectureship and in their vision around this lectureship. Now, Hal is a professor emeritus at the school, and he was recruited in 1999 to the school to lead the transformation of what is now the Division of Chemical Biology and Medicinal Chemistry. In 2018, Hal was the recipient of the school's Distinguished Service Award in recognition of his exceptional accomplishments and his contributions to the school and to the profession. And so in establishing this distinguished lecture, Hal and Carol hoped to honor the contributions of our alumni and to recognize faculty and staff who've empowered alumni achievements and to inspire our students. So I want to thank you so much, Carol and Hal, for bringing us together, bringing the community together through this lectureship and to teaching our alumni. So yeah, she also. And now I am thrilled to introduce this year's Kohn Distinguished Alumni Lecturer, Dr. Lisa Carlton. Lisa is a double alum from the UNC Eshelman School of Pharmacy. She earned her MS degree in medicinal chemistry in '92 and her PhD in '95. After her graduate work, she completed a postdoctoral research fellowship at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease in the Laboratory of Immunogenetics. And she has 25 years of experience in regulatory affairs and medical writing, and she currently serves as Vice President of Global Regulatory Affairs at Regenexx Bio. We are so honored to have you back on campus, Lisa. Thank you so much. And
I spoke with him, I didn't know who they were. And he was doing everything. So
76 crafts.
Hi, good afternoon. I am thrilled to be here. I want to thank the School of Pharmacy.
478.
Excuse me, 476. He's got some
for
Zithromax
this lectureship.
that is stopping.
And to you, members of the audience and people at
Actually,
home.
Actually stopped this morning. He's been on it for,
Friday afternoon.
it just was listed for 4 days. I don't know if you want to continue that or just let us stop
The
that.
fact that you chose to spend your time here listening to me.
Yeah, I guess it is. It's just the way it was listed. Sorry. It started on the 1st and it's
I'm
today's
not going to
date.
talk
Yeah,
long. I'm
sorry.
just going to share basically sort of my story.
478 Meadows,
After
it says
a
it's
couple
2
of
days.
conversations with the Kohns, I understood that there was a little bit of
546
business
Williams
about
is in here 3
I got into
days.
Therapy. So I'm going to just basically just sort of walk through my 20 plus years
I would like to speak with the psychiatrist
in the world.
Yeah,
we really do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we want to
The next slide is just disclosures, and I have nothing to disclose. So, so that's the easy part.
Get off the 2 liters.
So I'm hoping to get to the objectives. Okay, so nothing to disclose. I always have a little bit of nerves going into it. All right, so you've probably seen some of the objectives. Like I said, I'm going to basically discuss my career
66 Hams is an odd. Sorry, did you see that?
from a graduate student at this wonderful university into the real world, and then a transition into leadership. There's lots of stories in that. And throughout, at every sort of decision point or crossroads in my career, there was a conversation with an important person. And in hindsight, those were my mentors. It wasn't a formal mentoring program, but the importance of those conversations and how it shaped my next steps. I'll share some of that. And then I'll just give a very quick overview of gene therapy. I've been with this company for almost 6 years. I'm still learning a lot, and the field is huge, and there's always something new. So I will try to do it justice. And the reason, as I was working with the organizers on this talk, I was like, what in the world are they going to want to hear from me? And I shared that if you look at my resume or my CV, it looks like every step was a build on the previous step, and it looks very intentional. And I'm here to say to you today that it was quite random. And when we were trying to come up with a title, well, you know, a lesson in random motion. And so we came up with this sort of opportunity knocks thing. At those decision points, I always thought, well, you know, what if? There was always this opportunity that was being presented, and I just sort of took advantage of those. And so that's the short part of the story. I'll go into a little bit more detail. And for you, how many people are students? Okay, so quite a few. Dr. Brower, yes. So I assume the rest of you are part of the school community, faculty, et cetera. So I would ask that you continue to laugh at my jokes. This is my first time presenting in a hybrid fashion.
Thank you.
With people who are live cast, so I can't really see that you're smiling or frowning. So continue to laugh. And I will just ask, because I've only run through this once or twice. So I'll just ask somebody to keep me honest on time. Really, I'm just going to leave these objectives up here. And for the story part, I'm just going to talk. So if you have questions that are burning, go ahead and jump in. We could hold them till the end. But I want you to be as engaged as you can be on a beautiful Friday afternoon, homecoming weekend. So I did my undergraduate degree down the road at that other school, North Carolina State. And I remember I interviewed for a job, and I got the job. It was $17,000. And I was like, woo, I have won. And the hiring manager said, well, have you ever thought about graduate school? Because you could probably increase your earning if you go to graduate school. And I was like, okay, I'll do that. Because I really was not ready for the real world. I was, 22 years old. Who knows what they want to do at 22? Yes, I like seeing those no's, because I certainly did not. So I came to Chapel Hill. I worked with Phil Bowen in the molecular modeling lab, and he received a position at University of Georgia. So I was sort of at crossroads number one. He was moving the whole lab, the whole molecular modeling lab. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I didn't want to move to Georgia. And so I wandered down into the basement of Beard Hall at the time, lovingly called the Mole Hole, and ran across Dr. Brower, and we talked. And then I thought, okay, maybe she seems cool. I could do that. I could do a degree, and then I could go into academia, because that's cool. She's doing great. And so worked on my PhD, got through all of the grad work. And then I was faced with, okay, so now what? Going into academia, you're always encouraged to do postdoctoral studies. So I remember at that time wandering into Dean Campbell's office, Dean Bill Campbell. And he was, I don't know if did anyone get the chance to work with him? He was fantastic. And I remember saying to him, I had just finished up a portion of my research, and I was like, it's just so not satisfying. I did all these work, and I got these 4 numbers for this analysis of variance. It's just not really filling me. And we had a nice heart to heart. And he said, Lisa, there are times when I feel like, he was the dean of the School of Pharmacy. And he said, there are times when I feel like I really don't know what I'm doing and they're going to find out. And I thought, gosh, here the dean is telling me this. I certainly felt that, but so he was like, yeah, I encourage you to, go do this postdoc. This opportunity came up at NIH. And so I did, but it was in that conversation with him that I, in hindsight, was starting to get a sense of who I was as a person and my temperament. And so 2 years into my postdoc with lots of results, but nothing that was expected, I came to realize that I don't really have the temperament for basic research. Up until that time, I always had an endpoint. There was the master's thesis, the dissertation, the oral defense. There were all these things that were an endpoint. And then as a postdoc, I realized when you do an experiment in basic research, you answer questions, but you typically end up with more questions. And that open-ended aspect for me was a little frustrating. But now I am, 12 years into graduate study and postdoctoral study. I'm like, what in the world am I going to do now? I can't go back home. And so an opportunity at the NIH came. I saw a job position in regulatory affairs. I didn't know what that was, but I somehow figured out the hiring manager, and I called him and I said, tell me about this job. And so he explained it, and it seemed like the perfect marriage between all of the science, the basic and applied science that I had learned, and getting products to patients, right? So it was that sort of bridge. And I thought, okay, well, I'll give this a try. And here I am 24 years later, I'm still in regulatory affairs. So as I said, the journey to get into where I am now has definitely not been linear. Definitely wasn't, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And I didn't have a 5-year plan. I didn't have a 10-year plan. And so what I would say is that at every point, though, it was Phil Bowen, Dr. Brower, Bill Campbell, there were these 3 key people who helped me sort of find my way. And so that leads me sort of to my first sort of 2 take-home messages, and that is, it's okay not to know. It's okay to be uncertain. But what you can do is leverage your community, your faculty to find your way. Was really instrumental for me. And even with every opportunity that came up, it was like, well, I don't know anything about immunogenetics, but I'm going to this lab. And I thought, well, I'm gonna take advantage of this opportunity because it has presented itself. And I feel like every opportunity I've learned something, either positive or negative. And so just not being afraid to do that. And just by background, I am the first in my family to graduate college. So my parents were very supportive, but they, I couldn't rely on sort of their insight because they didn't go to college. They didn't know this academic life. I remember calling my dad. I don't think I told you this, Dr. Brower. I remember calling my dad when I was about to defend my dissertation. And I was so nervous. I was almost in tears. And he was like, what? Don't call me with this foolishness. Like, get over yourself. You're gonna be fine. And I was, but it was a funny moment. And so that's sort of getting to sort of my first real job in regulatory affairs. And then for a number of years, 15 plus years, I was in and out regulatory medical writing. I had my kids, I moved into medical writing. There was more flexibility. And this opportunity, well, let me back up. So I was in a consulting firm. I was managing a team of like 12 people. And during the time that I was there, it was like 150 projects that we worked on. It was a small firm, lots of turnover, lots of project turnover and lots of activity. And it was a little bit overwhelming. And so when I saw the posting at the company that Evergenix Bio, it was an individual contributor. It was about 25% pay cut. And I was like, gosh, if I told my dad this, he would really lay me down. Like, please, you are not considering taking a pay cut after all this work, all this school. But I did, and it's been an incredible, incredible experience, I have to say. And then 4.5 years into that, an opportunity, my boss transitioned to another role, and I was sort of at a point where I was like, well, maybe I could try on this adulting thing. But I wasn't really ready for 2 reasons. One, it was a horrible time. It was 2020. It was March of 2020. My mother had just gone into hospice. My kids were, we were in a pandemic. You probably remember. Not that we're out of it, but it had just started. So lockdowns had started. And there was just so much uncertainty. So that was just the personal life was just sort of shambles. And then I had this idea that to be a leader, you had to be able to do and know everything. And I had a conversation with several of my HR business partners, our CEO, and I basically said, look, there are things that I don't know, but no one's going to have more passion for these products than I am, because I had been there so long. And so now I'm sort of personally vested in some of the programs. And they, I thought that would be sort of the nail in the coffin to that opportunity for me, for my saying, there are things that I haven't done, there are things that I don't know. But they bought what I was selling. So here I am 1.5 years later. I've been the head of the department, and it's a fantastic team. And we were able to build the team and maintain the team through a pandemic where we weren't seeing each other for months on end. So it's been an incredible, incredible time. So to my bottom line point here is that it's okay not to know everything. If you own it, you're getting the skills as a student, you're getting the skills. And I think pharmacy is still probably the best training or at least for my career. You're getting the skills to go and find information. And now with the internet and the Googles, the sky's the limit. And remember, we used to have to go to the library, find the journal article, go to the printer, print it out. It was a little old school back then. So there's so much information available to you now, and you're getting the right sort of training to build on. And so to that, I would just say, imposter syndrome, maybe it's a myth. You just there's no way to know everything. So that's sort of my story part. Let me just make sure I'm not missing anything. Questions, comments on that? You can save it to the end. Okay, so now I'm going to move into just an overview of gene therapy, again, because the Kohns expressed interest in hearing about that and sort of how I got into it. And again, when I transitioned into this role, like I said, 25% pay cut, didn't have the experience in gene therapy, but had some good foundational skills and understood at least regulatory affairs up until that point. And so in terms of gene therapy, and some of you probably know this better than I, but I'm just going to sort of read the FDA's definition of gene therapy, and that is It's a technique that modifies genes to treat or cure disease. And they work by several mechanisms: gene replacement, which is depicted here, to add a functioning gene to a cell where the gene is either non-functioning or absent. And basically that function, ignore that. I thought this was a laser. The gene therapy introduces the functioning gene into the cell. The cell becomes a normal functioning gene, but the non-functioning gene remains. So ultimately, you're producing the proper protein. So this approach to gene therapy is the one that I know the most about. And I really only know just a little bit about it, but I'm going to just give an overview of the other approaches. Gene editing, big hot thing these days. It's basically where a gene, a guide molecule is inserted in it, and it basically corrects the coding in the DNA strand. And so it's used to either inactivate a gene that's producing a malfunctioning protein, or to correct a gene. And there's lots of activity in that world. And I hear that there's a new CRISPR center just being born here on the campus, which is super exciting. And then the RNA modification is the one I have to say I know the least about. MicroRNA was discovered right around the time I was finishing my coursework. And I remember reading, when I was in the consulting firm, I remember reading a document, and it was talking about microRNA, and I thought, what is that? That's not a thing. But it is, and it's basically a mechanism whereby these microRNAs can sort of turn off or block the translation of a protein. So it's a real interesting field. And again, lots of activity across these three approaches. Now, these various approaches typically are used, the vectors used to deliver the genes via these approaches. I'm most familiar with adeno-associated viruses, but the lentiviral and the adenoviral vectors have been around for 20, 30 years, so there's a lot of literature on them. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about them, but the difference is AAV is limited by the capacity. So if it's a big gene, then AAV, unless there's a way to micronize that gene, it's probably not the best in terms of just packaging capacity, but there are lots of benefits to adeno-associated virus. I'll get into that in just a second. So the delivery of the gene therapy could be via basically two means: in vivo, where the gene or the vector carrying the transgene is introduced either systemically or into the CNS by direct injection, and the target cells are transduced, and then the functional protein is produced. Ex vivo gene therapies are basically when the cells are taken out of the body. T cells, for example, in the CAR T space, they're taken out, they're modified, typically with a lentiviral vector, and then those modified cells are put back in vivo to do immunotherapy. So, like I said, I know most about adeno-associated virus, AAV. There are 2 gene therapies currently approved for using AAV as a vector, one for an inherited form of blindness and another for spinal muscular atrophy. And I'm seeing nods, so thinking you're familiar with those products. AAVs are small, non-pathogenic, they don't cause disease. And they, unlike lentiviruses, they remain episomal in the nucleus, so they don't integrate into the nucleus. And the capsids can be modified, and it really dictates where the virus goes. So there are different serotypes that have different tropisms throughout the body. So it's an attractive vector to use. And so in the time that I have left, how am I doing? I'm doing okay. This is kind of hard. So I want to face you guys, but then I need to know what I'm talking about. The lysosomal storage diseases, that when I first joined this company, I started working on MPS 2. I call that product my baby. But the thing that is sort of very interesting for me as a newcomer into gene therapy was that with these lysosomal storage diseases, MPS 2, MPS 1, mucopolysaccharidosis 1 and 2, and CLN2 disease, which is commonly known as Batten disease, they all have in common, they're very rare, of course. They are progressively neurodegenerative and primarily manifest in childhood. So these are all pretty devastating diseases. And they're all characterized by an inability of the cell, the neuron, to process cellular waste material. So that material builds up into the cell and causes dysfunction in the cells. And that manifests as neurodegenerative disease. I'm having trouble speaking this afternoon. And so just, and I'm about to wrap up, but so the application, and this is just sort of a cartoon for how cells are transduced. The gene therapy is introduced. This is an example of a CNS delivered gene therapy. It's introduced into the cerebral spinal fluid or the brain, and it transduces the target cell, which is the neuron. And then a miracle occurs, is what I say. The gene expresses the proper protein, and then that protein can then infect other cells. So you're basically getting more bang for your buck. So, and that's basically exploiting what cells do anyway. This is a normal, the uptake of proteins via this pathway and the cross correction of cells is something that our bodies do normally. And it is in producing this protein that the cell is then able to get rid of these waste material. And so just in summary, I'm almost done. I feel like I've been going fast, but I said this before, uncertainty is okay. It's okay not to know. Some people will have a very linear pathway to wherever they want to go. I didn't, and I wanted to come and be really honest about that with you. Taking advantage of opportunity, however, had helped me sort of figure out what I did want and what I did not. And I was fortunate enough to be able to build on each experience. And I didn't talk formally so much about mentoring. All of my mentoring was sort of informal. I was just basically leveraging the people around me to help me, again, find my way. And being really honest and transparent about what you don't know. A lot of people say, Lisa, you're almost too honest. And to that I say, I feel like if you don't admit things to people, then this imposter syndrome phenomenon will continue. So with that, I think I will open up for questions. I can talk more about reg affairs. I have some backup slides if there's interest there. Let's talk, let's have a conversation.
Thank you, Lisa, so much. This was terrific. Let's open it up for questions if you have any. And I know Chris is monitoring Zoom chat as well, so he'll let us know. And I'll just repeat them to make sure that everyone on Zoom can hear them. Any questions? While you're thinking, let me ask a question. Lisa, tell me what the best piece of career advice was for you.
Career advice.
Yeah.
I would say this was Dr. Brower. She probably doesn't remember. This was in the context of considering a faculty position. She said, be very selfish with your time. And I'm seeing nods. Those must be new faculty nodding. Apparently, new faculty get, at some institutions, get a heavy course load. They don't have a lot of bandwidth to really establish their research and their labs. And I remember her saying that, and I took it to the extreme. Like, I said no a lot to people asking. I'm just now at 25 years in a career, starting to say yes to things. So
that's terrific.
That's the best piece of advice.
That's terrific.
Career
Thank
advice.
You. Thank you. Hal.
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah, let me repeat that. So Dr. Kohn asked, if you're hiring new people, what do you look for in new people?
So for regulatory affairs, I look for really a science background. There are lots of regulatory programs, and I think the university is actually putting one together. Super exciting. But for me, I think, because regulatory it's not rocket science. There are these guardrails that are the regulations, but within that, there's a lot of room to sort of negotiate and sort of move products forward without getting outside of those guardrails. And I think having a science background is the best training for that. I actually have a slide that this is something that I presented within our company. This is what we do in regulatory affairs. And I would say that sense of knowing what you don't know, but knowing how to figure it out, I think that's what a science background gives you. And that to me is foundational to success in any career, but especially in regulatory affairs. And I say that because in regulatory affairs, you have all of these other sort of soft skills in this pyramid, building relationships, communicating, because in regulatory affairs, typically, at least in the experiences I've had, the regulatory owner is not really the owner. The owner of the content is the manufacturing team, the non-clinical scientists, the clinical scientists. And you sort of have to convince them to do this study that way or this study this way, but they don't report to you. So you're not the boss of them, but you have to try and influence them so that when you're presenting that package to a regulator, to FDA or EMA, that translation that they can understand it. Because the scientist knows it very well and is very deep in it, but the health authority is relying sort of on how that package is presented. So writing skills, scientific background, the ability to communicate and build relationships are really the most important skills for me.
I like that you have persistence up there too. Persistence and resilience.
Yeah, because
really
sometimes people don't listen. Not at my current.
I love your talk. Thank you. I love the honesty, the transparency, the imposter syndrome. I totally get it. I feel you. I just wondered if you would comment on the value of trying to surround yourself talents that you don't have to your team. Because I know that it's easy to surround yourself with people that you like and that are similar to you, that you get along with them well and all that. And I think I have kind of learned the hard way a little bit around trying to surround myself with people that are different, that complement my weaknesses, so to speak.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Can I just repeat the question,
Oh,
but a shorter version? And it's commenting on surrounding yourself with people who have complementary skills, even though it may not necessarily be the people you normally kind of gravitate to, or your friends. Like, how do you work that?
No, that's a great consideration. That's something I've had to learn. Because maybe 10 years ago, if you'd asked me that question, I'd be like, I need to be able to get along with them. That's what I would have said. But it's a great point that people with a different perspective can add value to a program. And so sometimes that differing perspective comes with a clash, because maybe it's also colored or covered with personality. And at the end of the day, I mean, I've worked with some characters in my day. But there are some characters that I would put on my team every time because of what they're bringing. How they're bringing it sometimes is a little dicey, but the actual content that they're bringing and the value that they're adding to a conversation, that's where those softer skills come in, just to be able to pull that information out and still sort of preserve a relationship with a difficult person. I mean, let me just say it. Some people are difficult. Not me, of course.
Catherine.
Thanks so much for sharing your story with us. I'd love to hear more about your transition to leadership roles. Because it seems like you transitioned a couple times to leadership roles and have had more and more responsibility. And it may not have been what you initially planned early in your career from your story. So did you undergo any type of formal leadership training, or was it more through informal mentorship or Google? How'd you learn your leadership skills?
So Catherine asked a question about leadership skills and that transition, and how do you learn leadership skills? There's no leadership pill that you can take that automatically makes you a leader. So how do you handle that transition, and where do you learn?
That's a great question. I think I said earlier that I was a very reluctant leader, at least for this particular role, given everything that was going on in my life at the time and where we were as a society. It was too much. But if I look at sort of a traditional regulatory pathway, you see that increasing level of responsibility. And so when I transitioned from the nonprofit into consulting, it was specifically, I can't talk today. It was specifically for getting experience sort of managing a team. And like I said, it was a big team. It was a fast-paced firm. And it was almost too much. And I'm, maybe a little control freak. So the idea of letting go and letting someone else do the work when you know the work yourself, is hard. And I'm still learning it. A year and a half in, like I said, I have a fantastic team. And I've just sort of transitioned off of a program to support someone else to take over that program. And it was not an easy transition. And so I talk a lot to my HR partners. I get a lot of informal coaching sort of at the water cooler, like, oh, here's what I'm dealing with. How do I approach this? But no formal leadership training, but I probably will be doing some because I want to, the thing that I'm struggling with is sort of how to sort of support a team, but also continue to feel like I am making progress in my own career. And it's a different level of productivity when you're doing something yourself versus supporting somebody else to do that. At the end of the day, the work product is theirs. And I'm saying, well, what did I do today? I mean, I talked some people off the edge, or, I went to these meetings, but it doesn't feel as productive as I would love for it to feel. But I'm only a year and a half into this role, so to be determined.
My question is, before you went into any of your different career fields that you did you ever take time to yourself to look at your values and what you value personally and professionally? And when going into those career fields, seeing if those values align with your values?
So that's a really great question. So the question is around values and moving into different career paths. How do you assess where your personal and professional values are and how they align with perhaps your next career move?
So to be honest, I, in a prospective fashion, did not sort of have those, I didn't have that sort of forward thinking, does this fit what I really wanted to do? Because at a lot of those crossroads, I didn't know what I wanted to do. But I will say that so my daughter has tuberous sclerosis, is a rare genetic disorder. And when I was traveling for the MPS2 program, I was at a conference and there was a poster there of AAV gene therapy for tuberous sclerosis. And I thought, oh, it's like my worlds collided. And I knew at that point that I'm where I'm supposed to be. And I can't say that I've had an example where my values or what I felt like I wanted was inconsistent with where I was going in my career. So I'm not sure I'm really answering your question, but I can say that in hindsight, looking at each step, it led me to gene therapy. And then some people say things happen for a reason. I don't know that I believe that, but I do believe that being in the gene therapy space and having a child with a genetic disorder has sort of equipped me with a passion that I might not have had otherwise. And so it's just by happenstance that my values are lining up with my work. But it wasn't prospective. It's probably not a satisfying answer, sorry.
Can I follow up with that question? So is it safe to say, or is it okay to think that our values build as we go within our career field? So sometimes we may start with a set of values, but that might change as we continue to
Absolutely.
Yeah, so the question is about, do you build values as you move through different careers and career pathways?
Absolutely, yes. And that's part of growing up. I'm still growing. But yeah, like I said, each opportunity, each experience taught me something about myself. I mean, if I had known at 22 that I need an endpoint, I might not have gone into research. I might not have wandered down at the bottom of Beard Hall to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. So yeah, everything's a build, or it has been for me. And I'm seeing some nods, so I feel like maybe others have had that same experience.
Yeah, Mary.
What's your next career aspiration? What do you see yourself going?
The question is around next career aspiration. We're pharmacists, we can't help it.
I don't have a plan. I have 16-year-old twins. Hopefully they're watching. They will go to high school in a couple years. I have this vision to like get a tiny house in the mountains and consult, just do a little bit of work, not too much. And I get calls. Regulatory affairs is a very hot field right now, especially in gene therapy, CRISPR. I get calls every day. I get a call or an email about an opportunity in wherever, remote base, because that's what COVID taught us, that people can work from anywhere. But I'm just really sort of settled where I am right now. And I just really want to see these products to market. And ask me again in, 3 years. I don't know. I tend to love small companies, so I think I'd want to stay with a small company. But I'm advanced age, so maybe I want to retire. I don't know.
Oh, retirement sounds good. Jalissa, you have a question?
Hi, great talk about one mention. I had a question about mentorship, right? You definitely touched on it a couple of times and you said that it was very random. However, when you look back retrospectively, I wonder if you could kind of see a pattern of those individuals, maybe where they were at stages in their career and or particularly maybe a certain personality type. And so I'm just asked because I'd like to be more intentional in getting into the mentorship as I move forward in my career. And when I look back, I realize that mentorship that I have has been random as well. So I need blueprints of some kind.
The question is around mentorship and thinking about it randomly, prospectively, but looking back and seeing whether there was any patterns and how to identify patterns. So you identify mentors in maybe a more educated fashion.
Yeah. Either by something you require at the moment or something you see that you're able to. I know it's a hard question. People always tell
It
me
is.
it's very random.
It is a hard question, and it for me it has been very random. But just being not afraid to show that vulnerability to a person like Dr. Brower did not know me, and I literally wandered into her office and was talking about what I could do within the School of Pharmacy, and so. Just not being afraid to be vulnerable and just ask people. I think fortunately, there are formal mentoring programs, but that's not something that I actively sought out during my time.
Yes.
I have a question about your interaction with the regulators. So thinking about rare and orphan diseases getting a fast-track regulatory review and the wonderful science that's going to help us deal with those diseases, what extra thing do you think regulators could do to bring this science out into the public for those diseases?
So the question is around rare diseases and the fast tracking that occurs at the FDA. What else could regulators do to help move things faster into patients?
That's a great question. I chew on that almost daily because they are tasked with making sure that products are safe and effective. And AAVs have been demonstrated to be very safe. But there have been, over the course of the 20 to 30 years, there have been events that related to immunogenicity, for example, that quite frankly it's still something that as a field that we're struggling with. In terms of what regulators can do, I mean, first of all, they just need more people. They're so overwhelmed. There's so much going on. But I think if there were a way to just have more frank conversations and share in a non-competitive space, share ideas, things that we've learned. We ran this study. We saw this in the rat model. We saw this in the monkeys. What have you seen in your studies? Right now, those sort of conversations are not happening as much as I would like. There definitely, people are presenting their work at conferences, but I'm not seeing a lot of those conversations happen at the level of the regulator that industry is privy to. I know they're having the conversations among themselves, but just more of a conversation about, because at the end of the day, everybody wins. If you do the math, there's almost 8,000 rare diseases. Half of those are monogenetic. So let's say 4,000 rare diseases. And if you think about the time that it takes to do drug development, there's not enough time. So that we've got to find a way to study and expedite getting these products into clinical trials and demonstrating that proof of concept and demonstrating efficacy so that we can help more people. Because that's ultimately what we want to do.
Just following with that question, it might just be a little different. When after, getting the products onto the market, do y'all also think about who has access to these products? And on a global sense, do you all sit down and like strategize on how it's going to be available?
It's a really good question. So the question is around access to products like these once they are on the market. What's the discussion that goes on around access, global access to these products?
That's a great question. The Regenix Bio, we're still all in clinical stage. We don't yet have within Regenix a commercial product, but one of our licensees actually has a product that's approved. Those conversations, there's a whole branch of the commercial team that is working on market access, pricing. And it's really, I think right now, the sort of the limiting factor is how much product you can make available. But companies are getting really good at manufacturing products. And so I feel like that's not gonna be a rate limiting step. Manufacturing is not gonna be the rate limiting step anymore. It's really going to be how to sort of manufacture in a cost-effective way so that the price is not so out of reach, if you will.
One more question, Mike.
I have 2 questions.
Kelly's going to give me the stink eye. You get one. Lisa's going to be here at the reception, so there's tons of time to talk to her more. So you get the last word.
At one point, I'm going to add this to competencies for our regulatory affairs, regulatory science master program.
Yeah, Mike, you got to get on that.
And the question is, for these sorts of competencies, for our PhD students, we tell them, for example, your scientific sense is going to be shown by the publications you have, your thesis, and your science knowledge. That's pretty straightforward. If everyone applying for that job will have publications and a thesis. The things that differentiate you are the other things that matter. So how do you look for those things? How could our PhD students demonstrate those things in their CV and their personal statements and their application process that would differentiate them as a soft skill?
This is a great question to end with. So the question is around the pyramid. And we're going to use the pyramid for our regulatory science master's program for competencies. But the question is, so everyone is who's going to be applying for positions will have the science, will have the publications, will have the presentations. How do you present yourself in a way to distinguish yourself with these types of skills, these types of professionalism skills? We call them soft skills. I hate that term soft because they're not soft, they're really important skills. But how do you present yourself so that those come across?
It's a great question. I don't know that I have an answer other than that, we get, thanks to a great HR team, we get coached on how to interview. So there are these behavioral based interviews, and I've been on interviews that are behavior based. So I think that's an attempt to get at those skills. But beyond that, I remember being in my graduate training program, just being forced to present. We did journal club, being forced to stand up and sort of defend an idea. The more practice students and graduates get with that, I think that's going to help. But in terms of different, like on paper, how you would demonstrate that, I don't know. I look for a good paper skill set, and then I try to use the interview and the back and forth to gauge those other skills, not soft skills.
Yeah.
I'm trying not to say soft.
I know. We have to come up with a better term for that. Okay. Well, please join me in thanking Lisa so much for her insight, her inspiration. We have a small token of appreciation that we would like to present to you. Thank you so much
Thank you
for your talk. Thank you for this interactive session. We've learned a lot. So yeah, I don't know if it's breakable or not, but okay. I would also like to thank Hal and Carol Kohn for their vision around this lectureship series. This has been terrific. I'd like to thank you all for your attendance and for your engagement, and a special shout out to our alums who are here for Alumni Weekend. And please join us for the reception and have some fellowship with each other, have some fellowship with Lisa. She's here. And so I know there's going to be a line of people wanting to ask you some questions. So thanks again to everyone.